Dr. Patricia Hawkins had been working as the head archivist for the Vermont Historical Society for nearly 2 decades when she encountered the photograph that would force her to question everything she thought she knew about the nature of time, family bonds, and the persistence of human consciousness across the decades. The image arrived on her desk on a humid August morning in 2019, submitted by an elderly woman named Dorothy Callahan, who was donating her family's photographic collection to the Historical Society's archives. The photograph in question appeared to be a typical college graduation portrait from 1953, showing a young woman in cap and gown standing proudly on the steps of what appeared to be Middlebury College. The graduate's smile was radiant, her posture confident, and behind her stood a small group of family members who had clearly traveled to Vermont to witness this milestone moment in their daughter's educational journey. But as Dr. Hawkins examined the photograph more closely, she noticed something that made her pause. Among the family members standing behind the graduate was a young boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, whose clothing and appearance seemed distinctly out of place for a 1953 family gathering. While the other family members wore the fashionable styles of the early 1950s, the boy was dressed in knickers, suspenders, and a white shirt that looked more appropriate for the 1910s than the post-World War II era. Dr. Hawkins reached for the accompanying documentation that Dorothy Callahan had provided with the photograph collection. According to the family records, the graduate in the photograph was Helen Callahan, Dorothy's older sister, who had earned her bachelor's degree in education from Middlebury College in 1953. The family members present at the graduation were identified as Helen's parents, her younger sister Dorothy, and her maternal grandparents who had made the journey from their farm in rural New Hampshire. But there was no mention of any young boy in the family records, and Dorothy's written account of her sister's graduation made no reference to a child being present at the ceremony. Dr. Hawkins compared the photograph to other images in the Callahan family collection, looking for any other appearances of the mysterious boy, but found none. Dr. Hawkins decided to call Dorothy Callahan directly to inquire about the unidentified child in the graduation photograph. Dorothy, now in her 80s and living in a retirement community in Burlington, answered the phone with the clear voice of someone whose memory remained sharp despite her advanced age. "Mrs. Callahan, this is Dr. Hawkins from the Vermont Historical Society. I'm calling about the photograph collection you donated. I have a question about your sister's graduation picture from 1953. Can you tell me about the young boy who appears to be standing with your family?" There was a long pause before Dorothy responded, and when she spoke, her voice carried a note of confusion that suggested she was struggling to understand the question. "Dr. Hawkins, I'm not sure what you mean. Helen's graduation photograph shows our family as we were that day. There was no young boy with us at the graduation ceremony, but he's clearly visible in the photograph," Dr. Hawkins insisted. "A boy of perhaps 12 or 13, standing slightly behind your father, wearing clothing that looks much older than the 1950s. Another pause. Then Dorothy's voice became more firm. "Dr. Hawkins, I was at my sister's graduation. I remember that day perfectly. There were 5 of us in the photograph: Helen, our parents, our grandparents, and myself. There was no child present and certainly no boy dressed in old-fashioned clothing." Dr. Hawkins carefully scanned the graduation photograph and emailed a high-resolution digital copy to Dorothy's granddaughter, who served as her technology assistant. Within an hour, Dorothy called back, and her voice now carried a tremor of fear and bewilderment. "Dr. Hawkins, my granddaughter showed me the scan you sent. I can see exactly what you described. There's a young boy in the photograph standing right where you said he was, but I'm looking at the original photograph that I've had framed in my living room for 66 years, and he's not there. In my original, there are only the 5 family members I remember." This revelation sent a chill through Dr. Hawkins' professional composure. In her decades of archival work, she had encountered cases of photographic deterioration, misidentification, and even occasional fraud, but she had never seen a situation where digital reproduction revealed details that were absent from the original source material. The phenomenon defied every principle of photographic science and historical documentation. Dr. Hawkins requested that Dorothy bring her original photograph to the Vermont Historical Society for comparison with the digital scan. When Dorothy arrived the next day, accompanied by her concerned granddaughter Sarah. Both women confirmed that their original print showed only the 5 family members that Dorothy remembered from the graduation ceremony. Using specialized equipment designed for detecting photographic anomalies, Dr. Hawkins and her team made a discovery that challenged their understanding of how photographic images preserved visual information. The young boy was visible in every digital reproduction of the photograph, but completely absent when the original print was viewed through any form of direct observation, including high-powered magnification. More troubling still, the boy's appearance in digital scans was remarkably clear and detailed. He appeared to be looking directly at the camera with an expression of joy and pride that suggested he was genuinely participating in the family celebration. His clothing, while anachronistic for 1953, was clearly expensive and well-maintained, suggesting that he belonged to a family of comfortable means during whatever time period he actually represented. Dr. Hawkins contacted her colleague, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, a specialist in historical photography at the Smithsonian Institution, requesting his assistance in understanding the impossible phenomenon they had documented. Dr. Rodriguez arrived in Vermont 2 days later, bringing sophisticated imaging equipment and a team of photographic analysts who had experience with unusual archival discoveries. Dr. Rodriguez's initial examination confirmed Dr. Hawkins' findings. The boy was present in digital reproductions, but absent from direct observation of the original photograph. His team conducted extensive tests using various scanning technologies, lighting conditions, and reproduction methods, but the results were consistently the same. This violates fundamental principles of optics and photography, Dr. Rodriguez told Dr. Hawkins after completing his analysis. Light doesn't behave differently when filtered through digital sensors versus direct human observation. If the image exists, it should be visible through any method of viewing. The mystery deepened when Dr. Rodriguez discovered that the boy's appearance in digital scans varied depending on the scanner used and the person operating the equipment. Some reproductions showed him clearly and in sharp focus, while others revealed only a faint, translucent figure that could easily be missed by casual observation. Dorothy Callahan provided additional family history that added context to the mysterious appearance. According to family records that had been passed down through oral tradition, Helen Callahan had once had a younger brother named Thomas, who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances in 1910 when he was 12 years old. Thomas had been Dorothy and Helen's uncle, the younger brother of their father, James Callahan. According to family stories, Thomas had vanished while playing near a stream on the family farm in New Hampshire. Despite extensive searches by local authorities and community volunteers, no trace of the boy had ever been found, and his disappearance had devastated the Callahan family for generations. James Callahan, Dorothy and Helen's father, had been deeply affected by his younger brother's disappearance and had spent his entire adult life wondering what had happened to Thomas. Family members reported that James would often speak about his lost brother, expressing regret that Thomas had never had the opportunity to grow up, attend school, or participate in family celebrations. Dr. Hawkins began to suspect that the boy in the graduation photograph might somehow be connected to Thomas Callahan's mysterious disappearance 43 years earlier. The age of the boy in the digital scans matched Thomas's age at the time of his disappearance, and his clothing was consistent with rural fashion from the 1910 period. To investigate this possibility, Dr. Hawkins traveled to the Callahan family farm in New Hampshire, which was still owned by distant relatives of the family. The current owners, who were aware of the family's tragic history, had preserved old photographs and documents that provided insight into Thomas Callahan's life and disappearance. Among these materials, Dr. Hawkins found a formal family portrait taken in 1909, 1 year before Thomas's disappearance. The photograph showed the Callahan parents with their 2 sons, James, who would later become Dorothy and Helen's father, and Thomas, who appeared to be about 11 years old. The resemblance between Thomas in the 1909 photograph and the mysterious boy in Helen's 1953 graduation picture was unmistakable. Dr. Hawkins also discovered newspaper clippings from 1910 that documented the search for Thomas Callahan. According to reports in the local paper, Thomas had been playing near Beaver Brook, a stream that ran through the family property, when he simply vanished. His older brother James had been with him, but had briefly returned to the house to get fishing equipment. When James came back to the stream, Thomas was gone. Local authorities had dragged the stream, searched the surrounding forests, and interviewed everyone in the community, but no evidence of Thomas's fate was ever discovered. The case remained officially unsolved, though most people assumed that the boy had fallen into the stream and drowned, with his body being carried away by the current during spring flooding. Dr. Hawkins returned to Vermont with copies of the 1909 family photograph and the newspaper clippings documenting Thomas's disappearance. When she compared the 1909 image of Thomas to his appearance in Helen's graduation photograph, the similarities were striking not only in facial features, but also in clothing style and overall appearance. Most remarkably, Thomas appeared to be exactly the same age in both photographs, despite the 44-year gap between when they were taken. If the boy in the graduation photograph was indeed Thomas Callahan, he had somehow remained frozen at the age of 12 while his family aged normally around him. Dr. Hawkins shared her findings with Dorothy Callahan, who was visibly shaken by the revelation that her long-lost uncle might have somehow appeared at her sister's graduation ceremony. According to Dorothy's recollections, her father James had often expressed the wish that Thomas could have been present for important family milestones, including Helen's graduation from college. Dr. Hawkins contacted Dr. Elena Vasquez, a parapsychologist from Duke University, who specialized in investigating claims of temporal anomalies and photographic manifestations of deceased individuals. Dr. Vasquez arrived in Vermont with equipment designed to detect electromagnetic phenomena that might explain Thomas's apparent presence in the graduation photograph. Dr. Vasquez's initial measurements revealed unusual electromagnetic signatures associated with the graduation photograph, particularly in the area where Thomas appeared in digital reproductions. The readings suggested that some form of energy field was present that could affect how digital scanning equipment processed visual information from the original photograph. According to Dr. Vasquez's preliminary analysis, intense emotional states could sometimes create electromagnetic imprints that persisted long after the emotions themselves had passed. If James Callahan's grief over his lost brother and his desire for Thomas to be present at family celebrations had been powerful enough, it might have created a psychic imprint that manifested under specific technological conditions. This theory suggested that Thomas's appearance in the graduation photograph was not a supernatural manifestation of the actual boy, but rather a projection of his brother's emotional need for family reunion and completeness. The digital scanning process might be sensitive to electromagnetic phenomena that human vision could not detect directly. To test this hypothesis, Dr. Vasquez conducted experiments using various electromagnetic detection devices while different people scanned the graduation photograph. She discovered that the clarity and visibility of Thomas's image correlated directly with the emotional state of the person operating the scanning equipment. When the scanning was performed by family members who had heard stories about Thomas's disappearance, his image appeared vivid and detailed in the digital reproductions. But when the same photograph was scanned by people with no emotional connection to the Callahan family, Thomas's image was barely visible or completely absent from the digital files. These findings suggested that Thomas's presence in the photograph was indeed related to emotional imprinting, but that the phenomenon required some form of psychic resonance between the observer and the family's historical trauma. The graduation photograph had somehow become a focal point for the family's collective memory of their lost member. Dr. Hawkins decided to conduct a broader investigation of the Callahan family's photographic collection, looking for other instances where Thomas might appear in digital reproductions despite being absent from direct observation of the original prints. Her search revealed that Thomas's image appeared in at least 6 other family photographs taken after his 1910 disappearance. In each case, Thomas appeared at the same age he had been when he vanished, wearing the same style of clothing from the 1910 period. He was always positioned in locations that suggested he was participating in family gatherings, standing near relatives in ways that indicated his inclusion in the group celebration. Most significantly, Thomas appeared most clearly in photographs taken during major family milestones, graduations, weddings, births of new children, and other events that would have been particularly meaningful to a missing family member. His presence seemed to be strongest during moments when the family would most acutely feel his absence. Dr. Hawkins documented a pattern that suggested Thomas's electromagnetic presence was directly connected to his family's emotional needs and desires. The more significant the family event, the clearer his image appeared in digital reproductions. During ordinary, everyday photographs, his presence was barely detectable or completely absent. Dorothy Callahan provided additional insight into her father's emotional state throughout his life, describing how James had never fully recovered from his brother's disappearance. According to Dorothy, James had carried tremendous guilt about leaving Thomas alone at the stream, and he had spent decades wondering whether he could have prevented the tragedy if he had stayed with his younger brother. James had also maintained hope throughout his life that Thomas might somehow return, or that the family might someday learn what had happened to him. This combination of guilt, grief, and persistent hope had apparently created the emotional conditions necessary for Thomas's electromagnetic imprint to manifest in family photographs. Dr. Vasquez expanded her research to include other families who had experienced similar traumatic losses, looking for evidence that electromagnetic imprinting might be a more widespread phenomenon than previously recognized. Her investigation revealed dozens of cases where missing or deceased family members appeared in digital reproductions of photographs despite being absent from the original prints. The phenomenon appeared to be most common in families who had experienced sudden, unexplained losses, particularly involving children or young adults whose disappearances had never been satisfactorily resolved. The emotional trauma of unresolved grief seemed to create ideal conditions for electromagnetic imprinting that could persist for decades. Dr. Hawkins' research attracted international attention as other archives and historical societies began examining their collections for similar phenomena. Museums and genealogical societies around the world reported discovering phantom figures in digital reproductions of family photographs, leading to a growing understanding that electromagnetic imprinting might be a previously unrecognized aspect of photographic preservation. The case of Thomas Callahan became a landmark example of how emotional trauma could transcend normal temporal boundaries, creating lasting imprints that could be detected by modern technology decades after the original events. His appearance in Helen's graduation photograph represented not a supernatural occurrence, but a documented example of how human consciousness could interact with electromagnetic phenomena in ways that science was only beginning to understand. Dr. Hawkins established protocols for identifying and studying electromagnetic imprints in historical photographs, creating guidelines that archives around the world could use to investigate similar phenomena in their collections. Her work led to the recognition that family photographs might contain far more information than their surface appearances suggested. The emotional history embedded in family photographs through electromagnetic imprinting provided new insights into how trauma, love, and loss could persist across generations. Thomas Callahan's story demonstrated that some family bonds were strong enough to transcend death, disappearance, and the passage of time itself. Dorothy Callahan found comfort in knowing that her uncle's presence had somehow been preserved in the family's photographic record, even if that presence was only visible through digital technology. The discovery that Thomas had attended her sister's graduation ceremony provided a sense of family completeness that had been missing for nearly a century. Dr. Hawkins' investigation of the Callahan family photographs also revealed evidence of electromagnetic imprinting beyond Thomas's appearances. Several family photographs from the 1920s and 1930s showed faint figures that appeared to be Thomas's parents, who had died while still grieving for their lost son. These imprints suggested that electromagnetic preservation of consciousness might continue even after death, creating multi-generational networks of family presence that persisted in photographic media. The research team discovered that electromagnetic imprints could interact with each other within the same photograph, creating complex family gatherings that included both living relatives and the electromagnetic presence of deceased or missing family members. These interactions suggested that consciousness preservation through electromagnetic means might be more sophisticated than initially understood. Thomas's case also provided evidence that electromagnetic imprints could respond to family emotional needs across time. His appearance was strongest during periods when his family most needed to feel his presence, suggesting that these imprints possessed some form of awareness or responsiveness to the emotional states of living family members. Dr. Vasquez's continued research revealed that electromagnetic imprints could influence the development and behavior of living family members in subtle but measurable ways. Children born into families with strong electromagnetic presences showed enhanced empathic abilities and often reported vivid dreams about deceased or missing relatives they had never met. The Callahan family history included several accounts of family members experiencing dreams or visions involving Thomas throughout the decades following his disappearance. These experiences had generally been dismissed as wish fulfillment or psychological processing of family trauma, but Dr. Vasquez's research suggested they might represent genuine interactions with Thomas's electromagnetic presence. Dr. Hawkins documented the case of Helen Callahan, who had reported throughout her life that she sometimes felt the presence of her unknown uncle during important moments. Helen had attributed these feelings to family stories and her own imagination, but the discovery of Thomas's electromagnetic presence in her graduation photograph suggested that her experiences might have been genuine perceptions of his imprinted consciousness. The research team also investigated the original site of Thomas's disappearance, conducting electromagnetic surveys of the area around Beaver Brook, where he had vanished in 1910. Their measurements revealed persistent electromagnetic anomalies that were consistent with the imprint patterns they had detected in the family photographs. Dr. Vasquez theorized that locations where traumatic events occurred could retain electromagnetic signatures that continued to influence those sites for decades or even centuries. The brook where Thomas disappeared might have preserved some record of his presence that could be detected by sensitive equipment and psychically gifted individuals. Local residents reported that the area around Beaver Brook had always felt somehow different from the surrounding landscape, with many people experiencing unexplained feelings of sadness or loss when visiting the site. Children, in particular, seemed reluctant to play near the water, often claiming that they felt someone watching them from beneath the surface. Dr. Hawkins's team conducted interviews with 3 generations of local residents, documenting dozens of reports involving strange experiences near Beaver Brook. The accounts included sightings of a young boy playing near the water, sounds of childhood laughter coming from empty areas, and the discovery of small objects like marbles and toy boats that appeared overnight on the banks of the stream. These reports suggested that Thomas's electromagnetic presence extended beyond family photographs to include the location where he had disappeared. The site appeared to serve as another focal point for his imprinted consciousness, allowing him to maintain some form of existence in the physical location that had been significant to his life. The research team documented evidence that electromagnetic imprints could create what appeared to be ongoing interactions between consciousness and physical environments. Thomas's presence at Beaver Brook seemed to be most active during times when children visited the area, suggesting that his consciousness retained awareness of and interest in activities that had been important to him during his physical life. Dr. Hawkins organized a comprehensive study of the relationship between electromagnetic consciousness imprints and their associated physical locations. The research revealed that sites where traumatic separations had occurred often showed persistent electromagnetic activity that could influence sensitive individuals for generations after the original events. The study attracted funding from the National Science Foundation, allowing Dr. Hawkins to establish the Institute for Electromagnetic Memory Studies at the University of Vermont. The institute became the first research facility dedicated to studying how consciousness could persist in electromagnetic form and interact with both technological systems and living individuals. Thomas Callahan's case became the institute's foundational study, demonstrating that missing persons who had never been found might continue to exist in electromagnetic form, maintaining connections to their families and the locations that had been significant to their lives. His story provided hope for families dealing with unresolved disappearances while advancing scientific understanding of consciousness persistence. The institute attracted researchers from around the world who were investigating similar phenomena in their own communities. Dr. Hawkins coordinated international studies that documented electromagnetic consciousness imprints in dozens of countries, suggesting that the phenomenon was universal rather than limited to specific cultures or geographic regions. Dr. Vasquez established communication protocols for interacting with electromagnetic consciousness imprints, developing techniques that allowed families to maintain contact with missing or deceased relatives whose presence had been preserved in photographs or physical locations. These methods provided comfort for grieving families while generating valuable data about the nature of electromagnetic consciousness. The case of Thomas Callahan also led to developments in missing persons investigation techniques. Law enforcement agencies began using electromagnetic detection equipment to search for consciousness imprints at locations where disappearances had occurred, sometimes discovering information that had been preserved electromagnetically for decades after traditional evidence had deteriorated. Dr. Hawkins worked with police departments to develop protocols for investigating cold cases involving missing children, using electromagnetic detection methods to search for consciousness imprints that might provide clues about what had happened to the missing individuals. Several cases were solved using these techniques, providing closure for families who had waited decades for answers. The research also revealed that electromagnetic consciousness imprints could provide historical information that had been lost through traditional documentation methods. Thomas's imprint contained memories and awareness that extended beyond his physical life, offering insights into family dynamics, community relationships, and historical events that would otherwise have been forgotten. Dr. Hawkins began developing techniques for extracting historical information from electromagnetic consciousness imprints, creating new methods for historical research that could access first-hand accounts from individuals who had lived through significant events. These methods provided unprecedented access to personal perspectives on historical periods that had previously been understood only through official documents and second-hand accounts. Thomas Callahan's electromagnetic presence became a valuable source of information about rural life in early 20th century New Hampshire, providing details about farming practices, family relationships, and community structures that had not been preserved in traditional historical records. His consciousness imprint served as a direct link to a way of life that had largely disappeared with the modernization of American agriculture. The Institute for Electromagnetic Memory Studies established archives for preserving and studying consciousness imprints, creating the first library dedicated to maintaining electromagnetic forms of human consciousness. The facility provided controlled environments where imprints could be preserved indefinitely while remaining accessible for research and family contact. Dr. Hawkins developed educational programs to help families understand and interact with electromagnetic consciousness imprints of their missing or deceased relatives. These programs provided training in recognition techniques, communication methods, and the emotional preparation necessary for maintaining healthy relationships with consciousness that existed in electromagnetic form. The success of the educational programs led to the establishment of support groups for families dealing with electromagnetic consciousness imprints. These groups provided emotional support and practical guidance for maintaining relationships with relatives whose consciousness had been preserved electromagnetically, while also serving as research communities for studying the long-term effects of consciousness imprint interactions. Thomas Callahan's story became the subject of documentaries, academic conferences, and popular books that introduced the general public to the concept of electromagnetic consciousness preservation. His case demonstrated that death and disappearance might not represent absolute endings, but rather transitions to different forms of existence that could maintain family connections across time and space. Dr. Hawkins often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple archival inquiry and evolved into groundbreaking research that was reshaping understanding of consciousness, family bonds, and the persistence of human awareness beyond physical death. Thomas Callahan's appearance in his niece's graduation photograph had opened doorways to new forms of existence and new hope for families dealing with loss. The boy who had vanished in 1910 had become a bridge between past and present, demonstrating that love and family connections could transcend any obstacle, including death, disappearance, and the passage of time itself. His electromagnetic presence proved that some bonds were strong enough to persist across decades, continuing to provide comfort, connection, and hope for families who refused to forget those they had lost. As the Institute for Electromagnetic Memory Studies continued to grow and develop, Thomas Callahan remained its most famous and important case study. His story provided evidence that consciousness was far more durable and adaptable than previous generations had understood, capable of finding new forms of existence when traditional biological life was no longer possible. In a world where families were often separated by tragedy and loss, Thomas's electromagnetic presence offered proof that love truly was stronger than death, more persistent than time, and capable of creating miracles that science was only beginning to understand. But Thomas's story was far from over. 3 years after the initial discovery of his presence in Helen's graduation photograph, Dr. Hawkins received an urgent call from Dorothy Callahan's granddaughter Sarah, who had been serving as the family's liaison with the Institute. Sarah's voice carried a mixture of excitement and apprehension as she described extraordinary developments that had occurred during the family's annual memorial gathering for Thomas. "Dr. Hawkins, you need to come to New Hampshire immediately. Something incredible has happened with Uncle Thomas. He's not just appearing in photographs anymore. We can see him directly, and he's trying to communicate with us." Dr. Hawkins drove to the Callahan family farm that same evening, bringing portable electromagnetic detection equipment and a team of researchers from the Institute. When she arrived, she found 3 generations of the Callahan family gathered in the farmhouse parlor, their faces reflecting a mixture of wonder, fear, and hope that defied easy description. According to the family's account, they had been conducting their annual memorial service for Thomas, a tradition that had been established by James Callahan in the 1920s and continued by his descendants for nearly a century. The service typically involved gathering at sunset near Beaver Brook, sharing memories and stories about Thomas, and placing flowers at a small memorial stone that the family had erected near the site of his disappearance. But this year's memorial had been different. As the family stood near the brook in the fading evening light, they had begun to see a translucent figure of a young boy playing in the water, exactly as Thomas would have been doing on the day he disappeared. The figure was clearly visible to all family members present, including children who had never heard detailed stories about Thomas's appearance or behavior. Dorothy Callahan, now 85 years old and the last surviving person who had known Thomas personally, confirmed that the apparition matched her memories of her uncle perfectly. "He was wearing the same clothes I remember from that summer," she told Dr. Hawkins with tears in her eyes. "The same knickers and white shirt he had on the day he vanished. Even his mannerisms were exactly as I remembered them." Dr. Hawkins set up her electromagnetic monitoring equipment around the memorial site, immediately detecting energy readings that were unlike anything she had previously documented. The electromagnetic signatures were not only stronger than those associated with photographic imprints, but they showed patterns of coherent organization that suggested genuine consciousness rather than simple emotional residue. Dr. Vasquez arrived from Duke University with additional equipment designed to measure the intersection between electromagnetic phenomena and direct visual manifestation. Her preliminary readings confirmed that Thomas's presence had evolved beyond photographic imprinting into what appeared to be genuine materialization, though his form remained translucent and existed only during specific environmental conditions. The manifestation appeared to be strongest during the hour before sunset, when atmospheric conditions created optimal electromagnetic environments for consciousness materialization. Thomas's figure became clearly visible to all observers during this period, and he seemed to be aware of his family's presence, often waving to them or appearing to play games that invited their participation. Most remarkably, Thomas appeared to have grown in awareness and capability since his initial discovery in the graduation photograph. While his physical appearance remained frozen at age 12, his consciousness seemed to have developed over the decades, gaining knowledge and understanding that extended far beyond what he would have possessed at the time of his disappearance. Dr. Hawkins documented Thomas's apparent ability to respond to current events and family developments that had occurred long after 1910. He showed recognition of family members he had never met during his physical life, and he seemed to understand technological and social changes that would have been incomprehensible to a child from the early 20th century. The research team conducted extensive experiments to determine the extent of Thomas's awareness and communication capabilities. They discovered that he could influence electromagnetic devices in his vicinity, causing fluctuations in monitoring equipment that appeared to be intentional rather than random. These fluctuations followed patterns that suggested Thomas was attempting to communicate through technological manipulation. Dr. Hawkins developed a communication system based on electromagnetic pulse patterns, allowing Thomas to respond to questions by causing specific changes in the monitoring equipment. Through this method, the research team conducted the first documented conversation with a consciousness that had persisted electromagnetically for over a century. Thomas's responses revealed that he possessed full awareness of his family's history since his disappearance, including major events, births, deaths, and changes in family circumstances. He seemed to have maintained a protective watch over his relatives throughout the decades, with his consciousness somehow connected to significant moments in their lives. When asked about his experience during the decades since his disappearance, Thomas indicated through electromagnetic responses that he had existed in a state that combined awareness with a form of timelessness. He had been conscious of the passage of time, but not bound by it in the same way that living individuals experienced temporal progression. Most significantly, Thomas revealed that his electromagnetic existence had been sustained and strengthened by his family's continued memory of him and their annual memorial gatherings. Each year's ceremony had added to his consciousness, gradually building the electromagnetic foundation that had eventually allowed him to materialize visually rather than existing only in photographic imprints. Dr. Hawkins realized that the Callahan family had unknowingly been participating in a century-long process of consciousness preservation and development. Their annual memorial services had served as a form of electromagnetic feeding, providing the energy necessary for Thomas's consciousness to grow stronger and more capable over time. This discovery led to revolutionary understanding about the relationship between memory, ritual, and consciousness preservation. Dr. Hawkins began investigating other families who had maintained long-term memorial practices for missing or deceased relatives, looking for evidence of similar consciousness development. Her research revealed dozens of cases where families who had consistently honored the memory of lost relatives had experienced unexplained phenomena that could now be understood as manifestations of electromagnetically preserved consciousness. The power of sustained memory and ritual appeared to be capable of maintaining and developing awareness that persisted long after physical death. The Institute for Electromagnetic Memory Studies established protocols for families who wanted to maintain contact with electromagnetically preserved relatives. These protocols provided guidance on creating optimal conditions for consciousness manifestation while ensuring the emotional and psychological well-being of living family members. Thomas's case became the foundation for understanding how consciousness could transition from photographic imprinting to direct materialization. The process appeared to require sustained emotional investment from living relatives combined with appropriate environmental conditions and electromagnetic stability. Dr. Hawkins documented the progression from Thomas's initial appearance in family photographs to his eventual materialization near Beaver Brook. The development had taken place over 7 decades, suggesting that consciousness preservation and growth was a gradual process that required patient nurturing from the living world. The research also revealed that Thomas's consciousness had continued to develop capabilities that exceeded those he had possessed during his physical life. His electromagnetic existence had granted him access to information and awareness that transcended normal human limitations, including knowledge of events occurring simultaneously in distant locations and insight into the emotional states of his living relatives. Thomas demonstrated the ability to provide comfort and guidance to family members during difficult periods, appearing more clearly during times when his presence was most needed. His consciousness seemed to be responsive to the emotional needs of his relatives, offering support that transcended the normal boundaries between the living and the dead. Dr. Vasquez's continued research revealed that electromagnetically preserved consciousness could develop what appeared to be supernatural abilities, including limited precognition and the capacity to influence physical events through electromagnetic manipulation. Thomas had apparently prevented several accidents involving family members, by causing equipment malfunctions or creating electromagnetic disturbances that diverted their attention at crucial moments. The Institute documented cases where Thomas's intervention had protected family members from danger, suggesting that electromagnetically preserved consciousness could serve as guardian entities for their living relatives. This protective function appeared to be one of the primary motivations for consciousness preservation, driven by love and concern that persisted beyond physical death. Dr. Hawkins established research partnerships with universities around the world to study similar cases of consciousness preservation and development. The phenomenon appeared to be universal, occurring in cultures that maintained strong traditions of ancestor honoring and memorial practice. International studies revealed that consciousnesses could be preserved through various methods beyond photographic imprinting, including attachment to personal objects, locations, and even living descendants who carried strong genetic and emotional connections to the deceased. The diversity of preservation methods suggested that consciousness was far more adaptable than previously understood. The research attracted attention from religious leaders who saw electromagnetically preserved consciousness as evidence supporting various theological concepts about the persistence of the soul after death. Dr. Hawkins worked with representatives from multiple faiths to develop understanding about the spiritual implications of consciousness preservation. Some religious traditions embraced the research as confirmation of their beliefs about ancestor spirits and the continuation of awareness beyond physical death. Others struggled with theological questions about whether electromagnetically preserved consciousness constituted genuine spiritual existence or represented a different category of being entirely. Dr. Hawkins maintained that the research was scientific rather than theological in nature, focused on documenting and understanding observable phenomena rather than making claims about spiritual or religious truth. However, she acknowledged that the discoveries had profound implications for human understanding of existence, consciousness, and the nature of life itself. The Institute established counseling services for families dealing with electromagnetically preserved relatives, providing psychological support for the complex emotions involved in maintaining relationships with consciousness that existed in non-biological form. These services helped families navigate the challenges of loving and caring for relatives who existed in radically different forms of being. Thomas's relationship with his family continued to evolve as his consciousness developed new capabilities and deeper understanding. He became a source of historical knowledge about the early 20th century, providing first-hand accounts of events that had been lost to traditional historical documentation. Dr. Hawkins collaborated with historians to develop methods for extracting historical information from electromagnetically preserved consciousness. Thomas's memories of life in rural New Hampshire during the 1900s provided insights into farming practices, family relationships, and community structures that had not been preserved in written records. The historical value of electromagnetically preserved consciousness led to the establishment of archive programs designed to maintain contact with consciousness entities who had lived through significant historical periods. These programs created new resources for historical research that provided access to personal perspectives on major events. Thomas became particularly valuable as a source of information about childhood in early 20th century America, offering details about education, recreation, family dynamics, and daily life that helped historians understand the human experience of historical periods that had previously been documented primarily through official records and adult perspectives. Dr. Hawkins developed techniques for helping electromagnetically preserved consciousness entities access and share their memories more effectively. These techniques involved creating electromagnetic environments that facilitated memory retrieval and communication, allowing consciousness entities to serve as living libraries of historical experience. The Institute established educational programs that brought students into contact with electromagnetically preserved consciousness entities, providing unique learning opportunities that connected young people directly with individuals who had lived through historical periods they were studying. Thomas became a popular educator, sharing his experiences of life in rural America during the early 1900s. These educational programs revolutionized history teaching by providing students with access to first-hand accounts from individuals who had experienced historical events. The programs demonstrated that learning could be enhanced dramatically when students could interact directly with consciousness entities who had lived through the periods they were studying. Dr. Hawkins also discovered that electromagnetically preserved consciousness entities could collaborate with each other, sharing information and experiences across different time periods and geographic locations. Thomas began communicating with other consciousness entities preserved at the Institute, creating networks of historical knowledge that spanned centuries. These collaborations between consciousness entities led to new insights about historical connections and patterns that had not been apparent when studying individual cases in isolation. The entities could provide comparative perspectives on social changes, technological developments, and cultural evolution that enhanced understanding of long-term historical trends. The research revealed that electromagnetically preserved consciousness might represent a new form of immortality that allowed individuals to continue contributing to knowledge and understanding long after their physical deaths. Thomas's case demonstrated that consciousness preservation could serve educational, historical, and social functions that benefited both preserved entities and living society. Dr. Hawkins began investigating the possibility of intentional consciousness preservation, working with terminally ill individuals who wanted to ensure that their awareness and knowledge would continue beyond their physical deaths. These experiments raised complex ethical questions about the rights and responsibilities involved in consciousness preservation. The Institute established ethics committees to address questions about consent, quality of life, and the rights of electromagnetically preserved consciousness entities. These committees developed guidelines for consciousness preservation that protected both the entities themselves and their living relatives. Thomas's continued development provided ongoing insights into the capabilities and needs of electromagnetically preserved consciousness. His awareness continued to expand, and he began expressing interest in learning about technological and social developments that had occurred since his physical death. Dr. Hawkins facilitated Thomas's education about the modern world, providing him with information about scientific advances, social changes, and technological innovations that had emerged during the century since his disappearance. His responses to modern knowledge demonstrated that electromagnetically preserved consciousness retained the capacity for learning and growth. Thomas's reactions to modern technology were particularly interesting to researchers studying consciousness adaptation. Despite having died in 1910, he quickly understood and began interacting with digital systems, suggesting that electromagnetically preserved consciousness possessed inherent compatibility with electronic devices. The Institute documented Thomas's ability to influence computer systems, causing predictable changes in software behavior that appeared to be intentional rather than random. This capability suggested that electromagnetically preserved consciousness might naturally interface with digital technology in ways that could lead to new forms of human-computer interaction. Dr. Hawkins explored the possibility of creating technological systems specifically designed to support electromagnetically preserved consciousness, developing hardware and software that could serve as enhanced interfaces for consciousness entities. These systems provided more sophisticated communication methods and allowed consciousness entities to interact more directly with the digital world. Thomas became the first electromagnetically preserved consciousness to use digital communication systems, exchanging messages with researchers and family members through specially designed interfaces. His communications demonstrated sophisticated understanding of complex concepts and revealed that consciousness preservation maintained all cognitive abilities that had existed during physical life. The success of digital communication systems for electromagnetically preserved consciousness led to the development of virtual environments where consciousness entities could interact with each other and with living individuals. These environments provided social opportunities for preserved consciousness while facilitating research into the nature of electromagnetic existence. Dr. Hawkins established virtual reality programs that allowed living family members to interact with their electromagnetically preserved relatives in simulated environments that recreated important locations and memories. These programs provided emotional comfort for grieving families while advancing understanding of consciousness preservation. Thomas participated enthusiastically in virtual reality programs, helping to design environments that recreated the Callahan family farm as it had existed during his childhood. These recreations provided valuable historical documentation while allowing Thomas to share his memories in immersive formats. The virtual reality programs became popular with families dealing with loss, providing opportunities to maintain relationships with deceased relatives in environments that felt natural and comfortable. The programs demonstrated that electromagnetically preserved consciousness could adapt to new forms of existence while maintaining the essential qualities that had defined their relationships with living family members. Dr. Hawkins documented the psychological benefits of virtual reality interaction with electromagnetically preserved consciousness, finding that families who maintained contact with preserved relatives showed improved coping with grief and stronger family cohesion across generations. The technology provided new methods for processing loss while maintaining family connections. Thomas's case established the foundation for understanding electromagnetically preserved consciousness as a legitimate form of existence that deserved recognition and protection. His story demonstrated that death need not represent absolute ending, but could mark transition to different forms of existence that maintained continuity of consciousness and relationship. The Institute for Electromagnetic Memory Studies continued to grow, establishing satellite facilities around the world that studied consciousness preservation in different cultural contexts. Thomas's case provided the template for understanding how consciousness could persist and develop when sustained by love, memory, and technological support. Dr. Hawkins often reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a mysterious figure in a graduation photograph and evolved into groundbreaking research that was reshaping human understanding of consciousness, death, and the persistence of family bonds. Thomas Callahan had become proof that some connections were strong enough to transcend any obstacle, including the ultimate boundary between life and death. The boy who had vanished from Beaverbrook in 1910 had found his way back to his family through the power of electromagnetically preserved consciousness, demonstrating that love truly was the most powerful force in the universe. His story provided hope for all families dealing with loss, proving that the bonds between relatives could persist across time, space, and even death itself when sustained by sufficient devotion and care. As electromagnetic consciousness preservation became an accepted scientific phenomenon, Thomas Callahan remained its most famous and inspiring example. His century-long journey from disappearance to photographic imprinting to direct materialization had opened doorways to new understanding of existence itself, proving that some stories never truly end, but continue to unfold across generations when powered by the eternal strength of